protocols taking primacy over the teaching of Jesus. That for me not to get kicked out or for me not to get suspended, I'm expected to follow a certain set of church protocols. And I find that this is true of people of almost all denominations. It's not just Catholics. Whether they are anything to do with what Jesus said is not the question. This is the way we do it. I think what we're going to have to do in this in-between time is develop various kinds of agape meals, Eucharistic celebrations of another nature. You're going to have to find out what that is. But when Jesus says, 2 or 3 of you gathered in my name, I am there. Well, you know, presence is presence is presence. If he says, Jesus said this, you all have read that passage, whenever 2 or 3 are gathered in right relationship, I'm there. How come we never told at least Catholic people that? No, he's present in the bread. He's only present in the bread. Why were we trying to limit the presence when Jesus was clearly trying to expand the presence and to make it accessible? So I think that might be the verse you want to build on in saying we have to understand there are alternative forms of table fellowship. There are alternative forms of presence apart from having an ordained priest leading the ceremony and operating according to appropriate protocols, right? And there's a place for that. Call it Cathedral Eucharist, call it Big Church Eucharist. I want to keep united to the big tradition, the big history. I'm not better than it. I'm not. And I want to keep uniting and learning from it. It led me, ironically, to this point. It was being a Catholic and being trained in Orthodox Catholic theology that led me to talk the way I talk today. Isn't that strange? It's not strange at all. That's exactly where religion is supposed to lead you. To critique your own container instead of simply to idealize your own container as the only container. So be prayerful, be imaginative, be non-oppositional, because your Eucharist will not be Eucharistic either if you're sitting there in a new circle of righteousness, a new circle why we're right and those stupid Catholic priests are all wrong. You have not advanced consciousness at all. Do you understand? You have not led the conversation forward. Or if you just hate men or hate bishops or hate Anglicans or whoever you hate, then you're not a reformer. So go ahead and do it in the ways that the Spirit guides you. And I think this will form the church for the next generation.
So a question I think that builds upon that is from Ed in New York, who asks, you make it clear that the emerging church is not a threat to the existing organized church. However, does the organized church see the emerging church as a threat? How do we respond to ordained ministers that see the emerging church as a threat or a cult of personality?
Well, up to now, at least now I'm not totally conversant with the field, but up to now it's interestingly enough been more a threat inside of the evangelical churches and even some of the mainline Protestant churches. The conference we're going to have here this March is the first major conference where the Catholics and the Protestants are going to come together here in Albuquerque. And up to now, I haven't received any opposition from my Catholic superiors. I think part of that is because we ourselves are not oppositional. Because we're not attacking, we're not dismissing. They, thank God, don't feel the need to attack or dismiss us. But they recognize, I hope, that we ourselves are in conversation with both. So I guess if you can yourself show that attitude, that you're not leaving the old group, you're not hating or dismissing the old group, I would hope that ministers and church protocols would not be fighting you. But I can't promise that that's true, because clearly in some places, in some corners, emerging church is already a bad word. If you're still at the level of tribal thinking, group versus group, my group versus any other group, that level of consciousness will always perceive every outsider to my group as an enemy. Quid recipitur, whatever is received according to the manner of the receiver. Right? And you can't change the receiver station. So that's why Jesus told us to expect and even learn from a certain necessary degree of opposition. Just don't get involved in the oppositional process yourself. Go ahead and do the good thing, but not in any kind of contrarian way or form.
So, Richard, earlier you spoke about what Christianity maybe has to contribute to other faith systems, and that test from London asks, however, how do we incorporate the insights, practices, and beauty of other faiths into our emergent Christianity?
Well, first of all, I'm glad you're asking the question, because that's a very right-on question. And that you even use the word practices. There's just a whole return to practices instead of simply having belief systems. It's, are there practices that you can do and I can do that lead us to the truth or falsity of things in themselves? And I really don't care if they're Hindu practices or Buddhist practices or Jewish practices. The Jewish Sabbath, which today is. My gosh, you don't get any better than that. Saying 1/7 of life, you better be non-performing, non-functional, non-practical. That's brilliant. That's just brilliant. The Sabbath rest. And it's interesting to me, just to play on that one a little bit, that so many of other practices have been maintained, but that one sort of went by the by. When I was a little Catholic boy, we were told we couldn't work on Sunday. Stores could not be open on Sunday. That was our own little way of saying one day a week has to be different. Now, why do you think that practice went by the by? Because it flew in the face of capitalism, right? And it lets you see that that's our real belief system. That's the power of practices. Practices force you on a daily or weekly basis to say, what do I really worship? Where is my energy really going? What is my energy really like? Contemplation faces you, for example, forces you to see that I've been negative for the last 2 hours. Where is all this negative thought come from? But you don't see that if you don't have practices. So I don't care if they're Hindu or Buddhist practices or Muslim practices. The Muslim practice of fasting puts most Christians to shame. We only have 2 days a year. Good Friday and Ash Wednesday, and most Catholics forget about that. And then we find out our Muslim brothers and sisters fast for 40 days. 40 days in a row, they put us to shame. How dare we say they are an inferior religion? Right? They found a practice along with pilgrimage that in fact has much to teach and much to confirm and much to call back in the Christian tradition. So go wherever you find truth. St. Thomas Aquinas, just so you don't think I'm a heretic. Like Thomas Aquinas said, if it's true, it's from the Holy Spirit. Not, is it from my religion, and therefore it's from the Holy Spirit. No, if it's true, it's from the Holy Spirit. And the only question is not, is it Hindu, is it Buddhist, is it Jewish? The question, is it true? Does it work? Does it transform your heart and your mind and your soul? If it's transforming your heart, your mind, and your soul, it's true, and do it. Right? And conversely, if your good Christian practices have kept you for 30 years in oppositional energy, negativity, all in the left part of your brain, I would strongly suggest that you let go of those Christian practices until you learn how to do them at a new level of faith, at a new level of surrender. Because simply this catatonic repeating of practices does not work in any religion. And Jesus makes fun of it in Judaism, and I'm making fun of it in Catholicism. Every religion at the lower levels will substitute forms for the experience of the formless. And if you haven't experienced the formless, the absolute, the Holy One, you will become obsessed with forms, right? This is the only way to do it. This alone pleases God. If you don't do it this way, God isn't happy. It's probably that God isn't happy. It's you're not happy, right? Because you're having to change your thing that you're used to. And we're all used to what we're used to, aren't we? Huh? I remember the first time, forgive me, Protestant brothers and sisters, but raised in little Catholic churches, I remember the first time I went in a Protestant church. I thought, oh my God, is it okay? Are you upset, God? All I was facing was my own fears, right? Not God's anger or God even caring, So once we recognize that this is our problem, not God's problem, I think we can move much farther.
This is a synthesis of several people, but Liz Day had sent a wonderful question about the secular and the sacred. Teresa in New Jersey talks about being the youngest, showing up for centering prayer groups and wondering about the youth. But Suzanne, who's a pastor in Canada, in Ontario, I'll just read it because I think it's important. But we have an attendance of about 100 on an average Sunday. Wow. And our kids number anywhere between 5 and 50, depending on whether it's hockey season. Goes on to talk about that in this busy, aka crazy paced world, what do we do as an emerging church to offer and serve the needs of these multitasking and perhaps overstimulated youth and families?
Wow. Is that Liz Day from Norwich?
Well,
from England?
Part of, built upon, but then that was Suzanne from Ontario, Canada, who asked that question.
Hi, anyway. Yeah. So the youth and just overstimulated people, huh?
And that's sacred and secular.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to start with, you have to find some practices to understimulate, right? And our youth in particular have been raised in a period that has always been overstimulated. So it's very hard, almost heroic for young people. They don't know how to do it. They've moved with this quick brain of quick images, strobe light kinds of consciousness that at first is scary, I'm told. Stephen and I are going to be able to go to Townsville, Australia next July, where the bishop and the entire diocese, starting with kindergarten and all the way up, have insisted that the primary spiritual practice for the whole diocese is the teaching of contemplative prayer. And we're eager to learn it very concretely. But apparently even in the Catholic schools of Townsville, Australia, the little kids are already given a little 10-minute time to lay on the gym floor, and the teacher leads them through a guided meditation. And now a lot of the kids fall asleep, but that's good. You understand? It's good. You don't need to be entertained every moment. You don't need more music, more ideas, more stimulation. So they're teaching the children already at the early ages to understimulate, to slow down. They say if you take the year 1800, we have doubled the amount of available information every decade since 1800. So you and I in this room, we have more bouncing around inside of this head than people ever had to deal with before. And this is no small issue. It seems to me we have to address it, even at that foundational level. Now, the good thing is that when you do slow down and you let the moment in and you let the event in as is, without judging it, critiquing it, fixing it, analyzing it, explaining it, dismissing it, just as is, that false distinction between the sacred and the secular is overcome automatically. That is a distinction that's made by the mind, you see. Decides this is holy and that is not holy. And here's where I go back to Jesus. The wonderful thing about Jesus is that he goes out of his way to disprove that system by finding God among the unholy. He's always going where the impure are, right? Where the people who are breaking the rules outside the temple. Even, we don't realize that when he accepted John the Baptist's offbeat nature ritual of pouring water over his head down by the riverside, I mean, that would have been New Age. Do you understand? He was supposed to go to the temple and follow the Jewish mandates for growing up, bar mitzvah, and we assume he did that too. But then he reached the age of 30 and said, you know, the boys down at the temple don't have anything to teach me. Right? And my cousin John the Baptist down at the river is actually saying it right. Now, we've made baptism, you know, as orthodox as you can get. We don't realize it didn't start that way at all. It was very unorthodox to do what he did. What's the message we get there? That he found, at least the message for my purposes here, he found the sacred at the river and not at the temple. This is a reframed universe, right? This is a reframing of religion. And that he's saying God is just as much down at the river as God is in the temple, which would have been a shock. Now that's finally imaged. Those of you who've read the crucifixion account, of course, I think it's Mark's interpretation, where at the moment of the death of Jesus, it says the temple veil tore from top to bottom. The two worlds have become one. Right? The word for temple was phanum. Outside was profanum, outside the temple. We have our word profane from that. There is no profane, because in Jesus, the human and the divine have become one. He moves outside the temple. Now everything is sacred. That's something that I think is going to emerge very quickly once we start teaching contemplative prayer. But for young people, it's going to be major surgery. It's major surgery for us too, for all of us. But any means of understimulation, any means of compartmentalizing the monkey mind, the racing mind, putting it over here and not letting it be your control tower. That's the method. And if the rosary does that for you, do it. It has for many people. Maybe one more.
All right. So we'll conclude with a question from Mike Boscia in New York, who asked, where will the leaders come from in the emerging church, and how will they avoid falling into the self-serving, egocentric traps like many of our current and past leaders have done?
Good. Now this ties up with the first webcast we did here. And I know, Mike, you're a part of it. So we have men as learners and elders. If you have not reached the level of eldership, seniority, the questions of the second half of life, use whatever words you want, you will do exactly what you said. A young man, or a young woman for that matter, who still needs to create her identity, to make a splash on Broadway, do you understand? To think of herself as important, rich, or whatever, she is going to use any system. He is going to use any system, including the Center for Action and Contemplation, for his or her own social and material advancement. Do you understand? That's the way the ego works in the first half of life. And I want to say, it has to. Do you understand? I had plenty of years to create my Franciscan identity, my priest identity. I wore the brown robe nonstop for 14 years. You know? So I know I'm a Franciscan. Do you understand? It was good stuff. A lot of young people don't have that. So you gotta do the work of identity, creation. But what we need in any of these emerging groups is at least a critical mass of elders, of senior